Welcome to The Bridge, from surviving to thriving in medical school, a medical student podcast on success and belonging at UCSF. This series explores how medical students succeed and thrive in medical school through important relationships, academic support, well-being, and career exploration. I'm your host, Alvin Gwonga, a second year, or should I say third year now, medical student at UCSF. Thank you for joining us. Figuring out effective learning strategies in medical school is a question often on the minds of medical students. We know that professional school learning can be quite different from how we learn in college. Today's episode examines effective learning strategies in the classroom setting, what works well, what may not work as well, and how to recognize what works for you. I would like to introduce three special guests in these episodes. Margaret Akey is a second-year medical student in the UCSF School of Medicine. Dr. Tracy Fulton is a professor of biochemistry and biophysics in the UCSF School of Medicine. And Amanda Dose is the assistant director for student programs on the UCSF Student Experience team for the medical school. Margaret, Tracy, and Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We can start with you, Tracy. What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you? And then what is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
Thank you for those questions. I'm getting a doctorate in education right now that I started in 2020. So that's the one thing I'd want people to know about, is that I feel like I'm really gaining an appreciation and a better sensitivity to how hard learning is for my students. And then a role that brings me joy, I mentor students who have decided to take more time to study for step one. So there's a program of support for students who, for whatever reason, need to be on a different track for studying for that exam. And they're partnered with a faculty mentor. And that mentor role is something that has been really meaningful to me and has felt really valuable. I've really enjoyed supporting students through what is already a challenging time, but is often really harder because of the circumstances that have often led them to have to make that decision.
That sounds awesome. I have the same question for you, Amanda. What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you? And what is a role in the School of Medicine that you find gives you joy?
I think a few things that are relevant in particular to this topic is that I was a first-generation college student. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, got both of my degrees at Iowa State, neither of those degrees being an MD degree. And I've worked at lots of different places, and I've worked in student affairs. And I came to student affairs in kind of a circuitous path. And I think there is a lot of transferable learning when I work with medical students of the skills that I learned of how to be in a new place, how to be confident in yourself and your learning style, of what you need to be able to be successful. And so I think that that has been really important for how I approach my work advising medical students. And a role that gives me joy, I also think I have the best job in the world, Tracy. Mm-hmm. I think that I have the best job because I more than occasionally get to be one of the people in a medical student's journey that helps to reduce stress, that is able to give really honest advice, but in a way that is supportive and lays out a plan for next steps and is really collaborative. And that is a really wonderful position to be in.
I'm glad that you both find a lot of joy from the work that you do and the contributions that you make into all of our lives. We appreciate that, and I think we really feel that impact. Margaret, same as Tracy and Amanda, what is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you? And what is the role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
Thank you so much, Alvin. And I really thought I would be unique here in saying that one of the things that I wanted listeners to know about me is that I grew up on a farm in Maryland. But apparently, me and Amanda have some competition here. But anyway, so growing up on a farm in Maryland is kind of the backbone of some of my initial medical experiences, since We raised grass-fed lamb primarily, but we had goats, chickens, pigs, cows. And so the first time I really was in a medical space was watching sheep give birth. And having that experience at the time, I was a kid, and it totally grossed me out. And I said, I'm never going to go into medicine. I'm terrified of blood. And then throughout my career, constantly overcoming challenges and leaning into those fears, since I loved science and engineering, and I liked the STEM world, and I loved people. So coming into medicine and having this really wonderful blend between a world of science and technology, as well as a world where you have to have communication and people at such a central part of your patient care. And throughout my journey, I went to UCLA for undergrad, and I worked as an EMT, driving ambulances and responding to 911 calls during the COVID pandemic, and constantly trying to push myself to do things that were at the time pretty scary to me, but also really exciting. And that process of learning and leaning into the things that I was scared of at the time, I think has taught me a lot. Also, growing up on a farm, we didn't have many neighbors, and we didn't have a lot of community around us. So something that I really found throughout my life when I'm in school is creating community. And so the role that I'm really excited about at UCSF that gives me so much joy is serving the student government as one of the class representatives for my class and being elected into that role.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves and for joining us in our podcast today. I'm very excited for our conversation, and especially because this is something that a lot of medical students often think about, like, how am I going to succeed in medical school? How will I study? But you obviously don't know until you get there, until you know. So it really leads me into my first question for you, Amanda. How can students set themselves up for success in regards to their learning strategies when they're first starting off? What do they have to think about?
I think that's a great question, because I work with medical students who are coming in to the school for the first time. There's often questions around if there is some sort of magic strategy. What should I be doing? And there isn't one in particular. And many of the things that are important for setting up for success before we get to the particular techniques and strategies is to really look at your whole life and put your life tasks in a place where you're ready to start medical school. And so sometimes that is simplifying your routine or making a plan for some of the day-to-day decisions that you need to make and put some of those on autopilot. Because I think the biggest thing setting yourself up for medical school is the change of pace. I also think that it's very helpful for medical students to really sit down and think about what are the learning strategies that have worked for me in the past. Medical school is different from other educational settings, but not that different. What worked well and what didn't work well in undergrad classes, what worked well and what didn't work well studying for the MCAT. And there are a lot of themes that tend to be pulled through then into medical school. And sometimes my job is helping students notice those things and to even document those things. I'm a big fan of writing things down and seeing that list and see if that resonates with you. And so I think being thoughtful about what has worked in the past for how you've approached challenging learning. And then lastly, I think that if there are supports that a medical student used in the past in undergrad, student disability services, tutoring, if you have used those in the past, set those up right from the beginning. If there's any hesitation about those things, reach out to the advisors, reach out to some peers that you've met during Admitted Students Weekend and ask a little bit about that process. How does that work here? And be pretty confident that if those worked well in the past, you should probably continue them and see if those are helpful starting out medical school.
Well, those are all great points. From what I hear, a big part of it is preparation.
Yes.
And I think that transition into medical school is so jarring, not just because you are starting medical school, but you're moving. A lot of folks are like going from state to state or different cities. They're changing their support system. And then you're focused on like all the immunizations you need, all of just the bureaucratic things that you have to get through, that sometimes you forget the very basics. How am I going to just study and make sure that I am good? Something that I figured out midway through school is I needed to have my meal prep done. And that's the promise I made to myself, that autopilot I had. So like Sundays, it was I cook, I make sure I have meals for the week. And if I have those set up, then I won't have to scramble for food during the day. Margaret knows the medical student scramble for lunch is always so hilarious to see, because electives will have their sessions and the next thing you know, someone's like, who has the pizza? Who has Panda Express today? But at least making sure that I'm nourished. I have found that it's made it a lot easier to just focus on school. I don't feel as depressed. And that's super important. And also that big piece about knowing yourself. I also did find that I experienced that when I started school of like, there are so many brilliant people around me and then an abundance of resources. You almost feel like you have to reinvent yourself. Like, who is this medical student? Even though like you've gotten here somehow, you've taken the MCAT, you did well in school, you've shown up for your community. And I think we forget to bring those pieces into our lives in medical school and feel like we have to change things up because of this new environment. And sometimes we do, but most of the time we really don't. And I find myself doing exactly what you've talked to and reflecting. I'm thinking of the transition into our clinical curriculum and thinking about what it will be like to study for STEP. When I find myself getting a little anxious, when I look at the folks around me, I think, Alvin, what has worked will continue to work. And if you have to change, you can pivot.
Yes, pivots, not huge 180s.
Yeah, absolutely. My next question is for you, Tracy. And this is about strategies that students can implement as they're starting to learn and build their foundation in medical school. What do you find are effective learning strategies that medical students have used? And what are strategies that you find are less effective?
Yeah, super good question. And I just would build on things that you all were just talking about. The concept of, Alvin, you talking about showing up and having been successful in the past, but being surrounded by really smart people. And I say leverage that. The strategies that I like to really emphasize with students come from my particular perspective on learning, which is one that really embraces the social aspects of learning. I think our curriculum is designed to leverage the social aspects of learning, right? So students spend a lot of time in various small groups that are designed to be a place for active, engaged, collaborative co-construction of knowledge. And again, there are so many different strategies to think about that are effective, but what comes to mind for me is really looking for ways to make small group learning count. And that'll mean different things for different individuals, and that'll mean different things for different groups, because there are so many variables at play when a group of different people come together to try to learn. But look for the ways that you can leverage the wisdom, the smarts of the people in the group, and the ways that you can contribute to that to basically create knowledge together, and look for the ways that you can involve your facilitators in that process too. I think small group is so cool because it's a built-in way to assess your knowledge. So that's another strategy that for me is really important too. Like big picture is just constantly looking for ways to assess what you're learning, whether that's doing the checkpoint questions or talking out loud with the people in your group to make sure that you've got it and you can explain it, but also to get the real-time feedback from the people in your group because they're learning it too. And it has the potential. And I recognize, again, there are many variables at play, and sometimes it's really challenging for a group of students to work together for lots of different reasons, or sometimes the fit with the facilitator might not be right. So, there's lots of stuff that can go wrong, but when it's working, it's such a beautiful thing, right? Like to be able to work as a team, to learn together. So I guess big picture, it would be really deliberately look for the ways that you can help to make your small group work and to invite others in your group to do the same thing. I think you also asked about strategies that are less effective. And I don't know, I think this is tough because I see a lot of students who try to make a lot of Anki flashcards using first aid to study for your courses. And I hesitate to say that they're less effective because they still are really important tools for amassing factual knowledge. It's really more just a matter of thinking about how much energy you devote to different kinds of learning strategies at different times. So amassing the facts is important too, but it really needs to be coupled with a more synthetic approach, and being able to explain an answer verbally or write out an answer is going to be a really different approach than learning facts from flashcards, which, again, super helpful tool for learning. And I see a lot of students who want to build a set of flashcards that's going to serve them for step one, but it's more just be open to looking for ways to really apply that knowledge and to elaborate.
Thank you for your perspective, Tracy. I think what you said about the small group learning is very salient because, as Margaret and I are also in small groups, there are moments when the fit isn't exactly right, or like it depends on the preparation of each individual student. But there are the moments when we have a facilitator that works well with our group. The preparation is there, and the topic also works with like level of interest. It's not too difficult, or even if it is, it can be very valuable, and a lot of learning can be done from a small group. I remember leaving a really good small group like, wow, like it sticks because you remember how the facilitator explained it, and you even reaching out to people who learned in that setting is something that's very unique. I've noticed that because each group has a different dynamic, I can't often reach out to somebody else in another small groups and be like, hey, like, what did you learn? Because they'll learn maybe the same thing, but in a completely different context. And I would even expand that, not just our small groups for our lectures, but the small group learning that we do at UCSF is very conducive to our learning, like the CMC groups that we have, the anatomy groups that we have. We have opportunities to have different touch points with different students and different learning strategies. And oftentimes people break out of these groups to create their own study groups and the people that they resonate with, that they study with. And it can be really beautiful to see. Exam week, you walk in the library and you just see people huddled together and building on knowledge. On the piece that you said about Anki, because Anki is such a staple of medical education. Right. I think in our curriculum, because UCSF doesn't necessarily teach for STEP, I think there is that tension of how to balance our F1 curriculum with the very real anxiety that is step 1 and step 2. But I think because we have a curriculum that is very devoted to case-based learning and group learning, that people, when they supplement and they do it well with their Anki, it can really help fit in those small details that can help with the overall context. It really depends on the individual learner. There are moments, even for me, where Anki is great. Anatomy and I do very well for Anki, but for our didactic classes, I haven't used Anki much. So this is where I encourage our listeners to be very flexible with their learning. And again, going back to what they know works best for them. Because even when I talk to some first year students, they're like, okay, I need to use the Anki deck, or I need to use all these resources. And it's like, just slow down, figure out what works best for you first. And you also don't have to reinvent the wheel. People have done well. That's something that I also have to remember for myself.
And I think also, Alvine, you don't have to do all of it. And it's easy for me to say this, and this is the best, but you can't do all of these things all the time. And so I love your approach of like what all of you are saying, like find what works best for you and know that you can't necessarily do it all.
And another piece that I'm having to remind myself of is that medical knowledge is built. I'm not going to understand everything the first time I see it. I'm going to have to review something over and over again and layer on my knowledge. And that is something that is uncomfortable when I think about it, because I think a lot of our pre-medical students, a lot of medical students were very type A. We want to have the answer now and the path now. And oftentimes that's just not how this knowledge is going to come by us. So that patience as well and that humility as well is something that we need in order to feel comfortable with the unknowns. Expounding on our conversation, Tracy, can you talk about some learning strategies or some resources that you find that are underutilized? Are there any that you wish medical students would do more often as part of their learning, and why?
I wish they would come talk to me more. I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious, but I do think that faculty feel underutilized or sort of like under-consulted, maybe compared to what things were like, I don't know, 10 years ago. Faculty office hours are not super well attended. There will often be one or two students who will come to office hours, and that feels really great to be able to help the students that really need it. No one should be forced to go to office hours. I guess as long as the students are getting what they need, but it does sometimes feel to me that there are faculty who have expertise in these concepts in their application, who also are the ones that are creating the test questions and who are exceptionally attuned to helping students learn. And it feels like there are some missed opportunities, maybe particularly for students who are struggling more with the content, that faculty can be a really great resource. I do feel like I see students who think about assessment as being something that happens at the end of your learning, whereas the health professions education literature talks a lot about assessment for learning, using assessment to really help you learn. I think a lot of students, for example, wait until the end of the week to do checkpoint questions. And I can totally see the logic in that. It's this idea of, well, I want to wait till I've been exposed to all the material, and then I want to use that as a test of my knowledge. But I think this whole concept of assessment for learning is that there's evidence that it's more efficient and better ultimately for long-term retention to start assessing yourself early and often. And so I think some students are probably doing that maybe with self-assessment questions early on. So I think the whole using checkpoint questions earlier, looking for ways to take advantage of any session where there are questions being asked and to really engage in it, even if you don't feel like you're totally knowing the material yet. The literature tells us that asking yourself the questions is ultimately going to enhance your learning. Again, even if you don't totally understand it yet. And I think it always feels counterintuitive. But it's also a way to help make more efficient an understanding of where you need to spend more time. Like, ooh, okay, I've got this. No, I totally don't have that. And now I need to know where to spend more time. So those are the things that pop into my head.
I think there's a little bit of bravery that needs to come from students when I hear your perspective there. Bravery, I say bravery because to be confronted with your lack of knowledge can be very difficult. There's fear there. There's a bit of ego. There's also like time. I think about reaching out to faculty. The way that I proofread every email before I send it out to anyone who teaches us, there's a little bit of anxiety there. We have the privilege of being taught by subject matter experts quite often at UCSF, and that can be intimidating, where you don't want to go to someone with a question that might feel stupid, or if you haven't like reviewed the material yet, or you don't want to be seen as lacking. So you might hold back, like, I will only reach out after I've done all the reading and I can come up with like the best question for them. But then the reality is sometimes time slips by and you don't have time. Next thing you know, you're studying for the test and you can't have those live conversations as you are struggling with the material. So I can definitely see how office hours in those spaces are underutilized, because at least from what I can see with myself, a little bit of fear there. And then same thing with the checkpoints, I think. Some of it has to do with, I want to know everything before I assess myself. I don't think we are trained in our educational system to see assessment as a learning tool. I think assessments are very scary. And at UCSF, we have the privilege of our curriculum being pass-fail. But I don't think that our mindset has adjusted to that idea that it's pass-fail, that there are many opportunities to fail, to learn, to get back up, and to cement the knowledge.
Oh, I love hearing you talk about that. When I'm working with students that are preparing for step 1 and are really scared of taking a practice test, we talk a lot about it's just data, and it's really important data for you to know. And it's data that's going to show an improvement for sure over time. You got to start somewhere. And it's really just the data that's going to help tell you what you need to do.
I can chime in too. I've thought a lot about how the culture of learning has changed. Like you said, over the last 10 years, more students have not gone to as many office hours. And how does that reflect the culture of learning? And I think a lot of that has to do with technology and all of the resources outside of UCSF that are just at our fingertips. You can find a YouTube video or a little other extra outside resource. There's so many in the medical world that explains the concept to you nearly perfectly. And if it doesn't fit, you can watch the next video. But something that I treasure so much is the back and forth conversational social aspect of learning that I think it's not as built into our culture of learning in graduate education spaces. And I think if I went back into high school or other learning spaces as well, but I think especially in graduate level education, feeling like for the stuff that's pretty basic, you should have the resources to figure out the basics on your own and go to professors for bigger questions or more in-depth, sort of looking into the unknown that you can't easily find online with resources. So I think if I would give advice to office hours for professors is have them say, well, if you need me to reteach you something from baseline and make the bar lower for students to feel comfortable engaging. And I think some of our professors do that really well. We just took our neurology exams a couple weeks ago. And one of our neurology professors was fabulous. And he had office hours at 8 p.m. on a Sunday. And so even just having it during a time that felt more accessible to students, and it felt like, well, if you're going to have office hours at 8 p.m. on a Sunday, it seems like you really want to engage with us and meet us where we're at. I think it worked because I've gone to office hours a couple of times throughout my year and a half in med school so far. And I really felt drawn in to come to the office hours when it was held at a time that seemed like a little bit more on a student schedule. And that's hard to say for all professors, but I think there are things that as a community we can do to create the culture of learning that we strive to and bring more people in.
On that same note, with the learning strategies and the underutilized piece of it, often I'll talk with students about various challenges. And one thing that I often say is there a way that community or communication can help with this? That community and communication help almost all problems. And so we start from that place. I think it connects to connecting with course directors, of going to office hours, of connecting with peers, communicating earlier when there are issues. It's hard to know what is the right time to reach out because so much of learning is in this compressed time frame. And so it's hard for students to know, maybe if I just study a little bit longer, that I won't actually have this question anymore, and then that'll be more time efficient. And that can be true. But one guideline I sometimes give students is that it's not about these moments in time where you have an objective failure point, not meeting expectations on an exam. But are there these moments where you feel as though you're kind of holding on by your fingernails? And that could be throughout the course of a day or during a small group or thinking about a certain concept where it feels like that hold is tenuous. And I think that helps to give a bit of a guideline before there's an objective failure moment that is feeling tenuous. Because as an academic advisor from that hat, I am much less concerned long-term academically by a student who doesn't meet expectations on a couple of exams. Sometimes that can be serendipity, where you go back, you really learn the material, you needed more time to learn it in a new way, and you have that strong foundation moving forward. The students that I worry about are the ones that maybe haven't actually had this moment of bigger failure or objective failure, but are really feeling like they're holding on by their fingernails chronically. And that is a tough place to be in. And there are solutions to that, but it often needs communication and community.
That's a wonderful perspective, Amanda. I don't think I'd ever really thought about it like that. Because I also think that in medicine, there's also this deep, deep shame that comes with failure. So you are motivated to do anything possible to not fail, to not meet expectations, to not be in the camp of like, oh, I have to go and retake this exam or have the uncomfortable conversation of what I didn't learn. But we forget that, again, that with failure comes that learning. And if you are just like chronically stressed because you are maybe learning something in a way that's not the most effective, but you're just barely passing or barely hanging on, that doesn't exactly mean you ever really learned the material. You're just holding on for dear life until the moment when it finally happens. Because I think it's almost inevitable at that point where you experience a failure. And at that point, it might feel worse than if you had experienced them before and had opportunities to correct yourself. Because then you don't know what you don't know at that point if you haven't ever had someone or something stopping you and having you reflect on the way that you learn.
Right.
This is for you, Margaret, this next question. What are some of the most effective learning strategies that you've discovered during your time here in medical school?
I would say the first one that I had to learn very early on during the first couple of weeks of medical school is that I could not cram this material. When I was an undergrad, I could pay attention in class and kind of do some of my homework here and there. And then a night before the exam is when I would really turn the studying up and I could get it all in one night. And I would stay up till, late hours of the night and then take the test the next day. And I realized pretty quickly in med school that strategy, what worked for me in undergrad to get through, is not going to work in medical school. Some of the things that helped were studying in a group. My roommate was another M1, and we worked really well together. That was just luck. We took our time and we really systematically went through the material and we did group studying together. And so that was fantastic, being able to work in a group. And I totally agree, Alvin, that you have to be really careful about group studying. And I did have those situations as well during M1 year where I tried to study in a group with other people, and holy cow, did it not go well. So you have to figure out and sometimes try different study groups until you find the people that really work for you. In the same thread of group studying, but a little bit different, at UCSF, they have the peer teaching program, which during the first block of our medical school, they have it on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. And it's M2s, second year medical students, who have developed lessons and teaching so that they teach you a small 30-minute lesson. And I went to every single one of these peer teaching, it's peer tutoring program kind of vibes where they do little lessons for you. For example, if you're learning about heart failure, and instead of having it be a lecture that is very dense, they try to make it relatable and fun and put memes in there and teach it from a more approachable perspective. And also give you everything that's really high yield. And they cut out things that are really important when you go to a lecture, like a lot of the background material or research that has led up to the knowledge that we've accumulated in medicine. In medical school, there is so much information that you cannot learn all of it and you cannot memorize all of it. And that is such a tough transition coming from undergraduate or a different part of your life where you might have tried to memorize every single detail and you were able to. In medical school, it's not going to happen. So you have to be okay with saying, okay, I kind of understand that, but I can't do the recall of it. But that's actually okay. And I need to be able to recall and memorize and play through the stories of some of the big categories of diseases. And we talk about illness scripts now, and you have to have the big picture things. But the memorization, at least in UCSF curriculum, is not as emphasized. And that comes back a lot more for step 1 and step 2, where you have to have more things memorized. But at least for a multiple choice test, it's recognition. It's not a lot of the time always as big on recall. So for UCSF's curriculum, a lot more of it is big picture, big ideas. And you can start to cut away some of the details so it doesn't get super overwhelming.
And I think, at least what I hear from our professors, is that those big picture ideas are really tied to how to start thinking about these big diagnostic processes. Like, you have a patient that presents with a certain condition. How do you think your way through understanding what they have and how to manage and how to approach treatment? And with this last block that we're doing in medical school, I realized that it's actually a lot more difficult than I realized. Like, you can memorize facts. You can memorize, like, Staph aureus is this, and it can be treated with this, and you can give this, and this is where it shows up. But I think the process of figuring out, how do I get to understanding that somebody has pneumonia based on their risk factors, their exposures, the labs that I need, and really being sure about the diagnosis that you're going to give to a patient when a lot of them overlap. And also being confident and sure of your diagnosis as well, and being able to explain the why. That, I think, is a part of what our curriculum has really been trying to get us towards. And study groups are helpful with that, because when someone is looking at you like, okay, you have the answer, but why? Mm-hmm. And if you're not able to explain that to them, that is that moment when you go back and you have to adjust and you have to learn. Another thing that I actually want to add to PTP, Margaret, is the personal tutoring services that we have here at UCSF. It's something that I didn't know that we could utilize, but you can request the upperclassmen, M3, M4, that you can work with, honestly, throughout the entirety of medical school, from what I understand. And I have been working with one since the first year of medical school. I remember have a study group doing pretty well, but I'm like, I feel like I could get more perspective from a fourth year. And we meet maybe 2 times or 3 times a block. And it's really nice because this time it's not always the blind leading the blind. It's someone who has already gone through the curriculum, still able to pull out the high yield topics, but now they also have clinical context since they're maybe out of their rotations, they've taken step and really guide and help with that diagnostic thinking. I have had the privilege of having one of the best tutors. I had him for the entirety of F1. He's applying for residency now. He's probably going to leave, but just the thought of having that support, it's very underutilized. I don't think a lot of folks here know that you can request a tutor to work with, mind you, even if you are passing your exams, but just having somebody else who can just tell you, A, if you're going in the right direction with your thinking, or if you need to pivot. That's something that I have found has been super, super useful for my learning. And now this is someone that's also mentoring me and helping me figure out the hidden curriculum in medicine. And that's like a near peer mentor. So listeners, please look into personal tutoring services. A lot of us are used to running on low fuel, low steam. We are chronically stressed and we don't even recognize that we're stressed. We don't recognize that we are in dire need of help or of pivoting. And that ultimately catches up to us at some point in our lives. If it's not in medical school, it might be in residency, and it might be later on in our careers. And so a question from Margaret, and also Amanda and Tracy, feel free to chime in. What do you believe the role of self-care plays in our ability to develop successful learning strategies?
Such an important question. and something that I think very hard about. I know it's silly. And for all of you who have taken the MCAT, who are listening to this podcast, you've got Maslow's pyramid that I constantly check in with myself. My mom has nothing to do with healthcare. She has a job in supply chain, but she loves Maslow's pyramid. She has a little Maslow's pyramid next to her desk. So she's always the one that reminds me, well, have you fed yourself? Have you gotten enough sleep and drank enough water? Because those basic things are so necessary in order to start learning at a really high level. So eating 3 meals a day plus snacks and making sure you drink enough water and making sure that you get enough sleep. For me, I need at least 8 hours of sleep every night to function and to think clearly. So those are the things that I have to prioritize more than anything. And then only then can I start performing at a high level. And so I think on the other side is friendships and partnerships and family and the people that fill your cup. My first year of medical school, I had a long distance relationship and I was traveling to LA every other weekend to visit my partner. Those moments of taking the time out of my schedule and saying, you know what, I'm not going to go to lecture on Monday. Actually, I'm going to do all remote lectures so that I can have a 3-day weekend instead of a 2-day weekend. That's a time where you have to do that self-care in order so that when you're a medical student, it's not just your life as medical school and there's nothing else. For me, it was, how do I develop myself as a person in terms of my relationship and my wonderful partner who gets me through medical school in ways that I would not be able to do without him. And with family members who take care of you and who check in on you, and friends that just make your day and make you laugh and you can sit around. So, after this interview, I'm going to play basketball at 3 p.m., even though I have an exam tomorrow. And so there's silly things that you just have to do. You have to laugh. You have to let go and be a full person. So it starts with doing the basic things to take care of yourself in order to perform at a higher level in school, as well as you just have to make time for the things that make you silly and laugh and bring you joy. For some people, that's medical school, but not everyone.
Thank you so much to Margaret, to Tracy, and to Amanda for sharing your thoughts today with us. I have one final question for you guys before you wind down. And it's the same question for the three of you. What might our listeners do to foster belonging for others at UCSF? Starting with you, Margaret.
Thank you, Alvin. I think the thing that resonates with me is to stay curious and open-minded and also brave. I think there's such joy in the process of learning in medicine, especially since we have such a privilege of being able to take care of other people and to be learning for the sake of helping others. Don't forget to take the time and sit and say, wow, I'm learning to become a doctor. And to remind your friends that too, and your peers, and saying, oh my gosh, one day we're going to sit around in the same circle and you're going to be a hepatologist and I'm going to be an anesthesiologist and he's going to be a neurosurgeon. And so reminding yourself that we're all doing this so that we can be doctors and help people, and also being open-minded and allow the joy in, so that in the midst of studying medical school, you're also teaching yourself how to waltz in preparation to go to the winter ball. And allow yourself joy and possibility and staying curious and open-minded and open-hearted.
I think that one piece of advice that swirls around hospitals is to remind ourselves, what did we do for our patients today? And I think for medical students, you may not have a patient today, but I think that it works well of what did I do for someone else today? And I think that that can really help to bind us together, to notice others, to take us out of our own heads. And I think that it's really good self-care to be able to be in a position to know how you might be able to help someone else, to notice someone else. And I think that that then fosters a lot of belonging.
What pops into my head is to be kind not just to other people, but also yourself. And something that I think supports that is doing our best to not make assumptions about other people, who they are, why they do the things that they do, to not make assumptions, because assumptions lead to judgments. Easier said than done to not judge. I think as humans, we're built to judge. But I like the idea of trying to avoid feeling like you know another person without necessarily knowing them.
Thank you so much for taking the time, the three of you, to have this discussion with me about learning. And I feel like a broader discussion too about how we build community here at UCSF. So in conclusion, today we've explored successful learning strategies in medical school, how students can be proactive in connecting to academic resources, and how to identify the range of resources available to students to promote their learning. Thank you for joining us in this episode. And don't forget to tune into other episodes in this series on medical student success. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to The Bridge, and please look for more episodes in our series. The Bridge is brought to you by the UCSF Academy of Medical Educators Innovations for Funding in Education program. Our hosts are Alvin Gwanga and Dr. Nakai Corral. Our production staff are Dr. Eric Hung and Valerie Jones. Our sound engineer is John Oliver. Our music is by Duke Q, Wax Roof, Mabanwa, and Les Imprimes, courtesy of Big Crown Records.